some of this stuff. Okay, continue. And great. Okay, so my name is Jim, and I'm the creator of this static site generator called Plenty. Now, Plenty uses a Svelte front end to build really dynamic and flexible front end experiences, and it's designed in a Jamstack fashion. So the idea is that you can build a really lightweight website, and then you can deploy it somewhere on like a CDN where you don't have to worry about managing your server or server-side programming languages and managing things like database. So it's basically supposed to be flat files and just like a really flexible and light experience for building websites that's secure and doesn't have security updates they have to constantly worry about. So this is the project page for Plentico, but I think it'd be cool to just hop in and take a look at some of this stuff. So if you know me, you know that I'm not great at putting together slides, but I figured it might be kind of cool if we put together some slides together just to show off how Plenty works at a high level and go through some of the aspects that you get out of the box. So let me come over here to my terminal. And let me just bump up the size so you can see what's going on here. And I'm going to just go to my desktop real quick. And I'm going to create a new site. So I have Plenty already installed on my computer, so you can use the Plenty command line utility. I'm going to create a new site, and we'll call this Nerds. And when you do that, it creates a new folder on your desktop called Nerds, so you can just cd into that folder. And then I can just open this in a text editor so we can see all the files that are happening here. And once that's open, I can close out of this because our text editor actually has a little terminal in it. So I can open our terminal here. And what I can do is I can start up a web server as soon as I open the project up, and that'll show me a little information about my build. It'll give me a URL here that I can visit in my browser so we can see what's happening out of the box with Plenty. I copy that and I open a new tab and I paste that in. You'll see this website here. So this is the starter that Plenty happens out of the box. This is just on my local host, as you can see. There's some blog posts. There are some paginated output. There's some internal pages. Now that's all great, but it doesn't really help us with our slideshow. So let's go ahead and start building slideshow out. If I go back to my terminal here and I open up a new window, I can use the Plenty command line utility again. So I can do Plenty.
Hey, Jim, we can't see your terminal window.
Oh, you can't. Do you see like it's at the bottom of my text editor? Can you see that?
No, we can see your browser.
Oh, okay. Let me try resharing my screen. Thank you for calling that out. Let me see here. New share. Oh, advanced. It looks like in Zoom, it wants me to share one or the other. Is there a way to share my whole?
There should be an option to share your whole desktop.
That's weird. I don't see it. I mean, you can probably see my text editor now, right? But you can't see. But you can't see my browser if I flip back like this, right?
No.
Oh no. Okay. Well, I can flip it manually. I guess that's kind of interesting. I don't have an option to share the whole thing for some reason. Optimize new video. Okay. Well, I'll try to do my best to flip back and forth between those. Okay, thanks for calling that out. Okay. So we're over here in our command line utility. We're doing previously, if you didn't see that, basically we just did a Plenty serve command. It built the site. Now we can come over here. We can run a Plenty new, and I can create a new content type, and I'm going to create a content type called slides. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. Maybe that's easier for people to see. So I created a new content type called slides. You can see that created a new content source and a new layout. So basically our content source lives in our content folder. So created this new folder called slides. In there, there's a file called blueprint.json. Don't really worry about that too much right now. Also in our layouts, in our content folder, it created a Svelte file called slides.svelte. So this is the layout for that content type. Now, this doesn't have much information in it right now. So we actually have to go through here and put some information in here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to an existing template. So I'm going to go to my pages template, and I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to paste that into my slides template, which is blank right now. So I paste that in there and I'm saving that. And then I'm going to put some slides in here. So on my computer, which you probably can't see at the moment, let me just going to copy some files over. I'm not sure how much of this you're actually seeing, but there's a folder on my computer called slides. And in there, I have 5 JSON files, which I'm copying right now. And I'm just going to paste into my, my slides folder in my editor. And hopefully you can start seeing those now that I pasted them in there. And can you see the slide 1, 2 through 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep.
Okay. So in here now we have some slides I just copied and pasted. And basically, these are pretty standard. They have a title, they have a description, and then each one of these has an order to them. Now, if you look back over here at our regular pages, so we have our pages in this content folder, and you look at about and contact, they look pretty similar. They have the title, description, and author. So they're slightly different. We have a title, description, in an order instead of an author, but they're pretty close to the original information there. So basically, this markup that we copied over from our page template should generally work, although there'll be a few differences there. So let's first go and let's make sure we have a way to link to this. So I want to go to one of my other templates here. So I'm going to go to my global, and I'm going to go to my nav template. And I'm just going to quickly add a link here to go to a slide, right? So we have an about page, a contact page. I'm going to add a slide, and I'll just say, give me slide 1. And then I'm going to just say slides here so we can add another link in our main menu. Now let me just flip the zoom back over so we see the other window here. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my browser again. And so now if I come back here and I reload this page, you see that we have 3 links in the upper right hand here. So we have about, we have slides, and contact. And please, if I'm ever describing something and I'm on the wrong page, just stop me and let me know. But so we're looking at this, and if I were to click into one of these links here, so this new slide link, you notice here that we have a 404 not found page. Now, this is cool because Plenty is going to handle some of your 404 out of the box, so you don't have to really worry about that. But what's happening here is I defined a path at the top here, a URL path in my menu where I want to go to slide 1. But this page actually lives by default at slides/slide 1. So if I reload that, you can see that we have our first slide here, and we have some other information. So we have some information about like which template is producing this and which content file is being used to actually produce the content. But what's happening here, if I switch back over to my editor, is we have this structure over here in our content folder, and Plenty tries to make a route for you automatically for each content file that you have. So for instance, we have this content folder here, and then we have a folder called slides, and then we have file names like slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. So it basically tries to slugify these into paths. And that's why when you're over in your browser, you see that it's /slides/slide 1. Now, we wanted to, in our menu here, we wanted to use slide/1. So we dropped the S and then we dropped the word slide afterwards. Now we can override our paths. So by default, it wants to use the folder structure, but we have a site-wide configuration file here called plenty.json. And we can use that to override our paths to make them be exactly what we want. So you can see right here, we're overriding a few paths right now. So we're overriding the pages content type path, and we're overriding our index. So we can come in here and we can do the same thing for slides. So we make that slides. And then we wanted that path to be hard-coded, the word slide. And then what we wanted is we wanted just the number. Now, we know from our content source here, if I were to take a look at one of these, we know that there's an order in each one of those that has a number. So we can actually come in here and I can use a replacement pattern for getting a field value. And I can just get the order variable out of there. And that should be able to be used in my path now. So if I save that, then we can override that. So this will hook into our navigation that we set up. Now, keep in mind, some of this API stuff is changing. So we're trying to get ready for releasing a 0.4 version of Plenty. So this is going to become routes in the future. And then this replacement pattern here is most likely going to be fields with an S. So if you're looking at this video later on, just keep in mind that some of these API things are going to be changing. But let's go back to our browser here and let's come here and reload our page. Now, if we click on slides, you'll see that we go to the first slide here. So that's great. This is actually hooked up now.
See it.
Oh, yes, of course. Let me go back over to, thank you. You're probably gonna have to keep reminding me. So we're over here in our browser. I did a reload. I clicked on the link in our nav. This time we don't 404. We get the pattern because we basically overrode the routes for each one of these individual slide pages. Now, this is great, but this isn't really looking like a slideshow. This looks like a regular web page to me. So maybe we can do a couple of other things here. Maybe we want to do something like override the nav here and the footer. We want to get rid of those. And we probably don't need this little widget here at the bottom, although it's kind of nice. Like you can see that it changes when we go to different content slides, right? So we have the slide 2 here, but we don't really need that. So we can get rid of that. And then we need some directionals to be able to go forward and backward on our slideshow. So let's look at doing that. I'm going to flip back over here and I'm going to change my screen so y'all can see what I'm doing. And over here, I'm going to go to my main wrapper HTML, and I'm going to make it so the header and the footer no longer appear for my slideshow pages. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at my wrapper. I'm going to say, okay, I only want this nav to appear if, I'll do an if statement, if the content.type does not equal slides. So we don't want it to appear for slides. And let's just get this like this. And we'll do the same thing for our footer at the bottom here. So I'll paste this in here and I will close my if statement like that. And if I save that, and let me do a switch here again, back to my browser, and I reload this, you see now that we no longer have a header or footer. So that's looking good. And let me switch back to my text editor. And now we want to go to our slides.svelte template here. So I'm going to click on this and let's update some of this information here to look a little more like our slides. So first of all, we don't need this uses component anymore. We're going to get rid of that thing at the bottom. And since we don't need that anymore, I can get rid of this import statement up at the top here. And then what we want to do is we probably want to add some transitions. So when we load this page, it actually looks like it does something. So Svelte has some transitions out of the box, so we can actually import transitions like scale, for instance, from a package called Svelte transition. And once we have scale in there, we can do things like this. We can wrap our slides in a div. So I can call this slide. We'll give it an ID. And then I can add an in transition of scaling. And I might want to set some parameters. So I might want to delay how long it takes to come in. So I'll give a 300 millisecond delay. And then I'll give an out and I'll scale that as well, but I don't want a delay for it going out. So basically I want the first one to disappear pretty fast. And then the other one kind of comes in gradually. And then I'm going to wrap this around all our content here. And I'm going to save that. Let me see what's going on over here. If I switch back to the browser and share. So if I reload this, yeah, let's see, let's go back home. Okay, so did you see that transition? It was pretty quick, but when I went to slides, it does kind of a fly in like that. And if I go back, then you can see it transitions out. Now that's kind of cool. But one thing that you might notice here, and let me illustrate exactly what's happening. If I add some controls, so let me add, oh, I got to switch back.
Switch back.
Yeah, switch back to my editor. And I'm going to add some controls here. So I'm basically going to add a link. So in href. And I want this link to basically allow me to go forward or backwards. So the one that happens first is going to be backwards. So basically I need to pull the order out of my content source. The first thing I actually have to do here is I have to make sure I import that variable. So we have in our data source, right? We have, oops, let me show this again. In our slide data source, we have this key called order. Basically in our template, we're pulling that key in here by saying order. And then I want to say, well, give me the URL slide, but then give me the order -1. And then we'll call this previous. Now, one thing you have to do here is that order is a string by default. So when you do like concatenation with JavaScript, so basically if I had order value number 1 and I want to add 1 to it, if I add 1 to a string, it's going to make it 11 and not 2. So make sure that you're getting a number representation of that variable. So just wrap it in number. And so that'll basically give us the number value of order. And then we can do an operation like -1 to get the previous. And we can also do something like this to get the next. I'm going to do order +1, and we'll call this next. And I'll save that. And let me go back and share the browser again. And let me reload this. Okay, so we have previous and next here. Now, if I click next, you see that it goes to pagination and store. So it's going, right? It's moving along. But you notice that transition's not happening anymore, right? It's kind of weird. So if we go back home, we get a transition. If we go to our slides, we get a transition. But if we go between slides, we don't. Now, that's a little weird thing that's happening with Svelte. Basically, every page that we're rendering here in our HTML, we're doing a Svelte dynamic component. And if we're passing the same class constructor here to this parameter, basically what's happening is it doesn't know, since we're using the same template here in our slides.svelte file, it doesn't know to destroy that component and rebuild it. So if we want to do something like that, we can force that to happen by just coming here and using a key block. So basically we can say, give me a key off of the content, because basically we have a content
Switch screens.
Oh, geez. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. It is harder than it should be to remember to switch. Okay. So basically I'm adding this key block here around my transition. So basically what I'm saying is we have a content object. This content object's changing even though we're using the same layout every time. So basically every time that content object changes, make sure that we rerun this animation. So I'm basically just wrapping this whole thing in a key block like that. And if I save that, and if I were to come back, and I'll switch my screen in 1 second, and I reload my slides. Okay, so now you see this transition between slides, right? I can go next and I can go previous, and it kind of does that transition. So we're getting there. Let's add a little bit of style to this so it actually looks more like a slideshow. We're getting close, but we're not quite all the way there. A couple of things I want to do. Let me switch back. I'm so used to just like rapid toggling. Can you see make sure, let me know if you can't see my text editor right now. But back in my text editor, basically, I want to do a couple of things. I want to make sure I know what slide I'm on. So I'm going to add the order variable down here in my header one more time so we know what order we're on. And then I'm also going to come here. I'm just going to add some styles. Now, in Svelte, styles are great because they're actually scoped to your component. So you can just add a style tag here like this. And you could target HTML directly. You don't actually have to target specific classes because it gets scoped exactly to this component. So if you target an anchor tag, for instance, it's not going to propagate to other anchor tags. And also if you add styles here that aren't used, they'll get shaken out. So you have a really small bundle at the end of the day. Now, let's just style some of this. So I'm going to target the slide for now. It's easy just because I have a class name. So I'm going to call this slide. I'm basically going to display flex. Let's do a flex direction of column. Let's make sure our height is 100. And let's justify content center. Okay, let's do something like that. And then let's come here and let's grab our controls here. So let's actually set some classes on our controls. Let's just call this class equals control. And we'll do the same thing down here for this one as well. So class equals control. And we'll just target our controls. And we'll say control should whoops. Let's position these absolute. And let's just move them down 50%. And let's give them a little bit of margin, like 20 pixels, so they're not right against the edge of the screen. And then let's also position one to the left and one to the right. So we'll grab control and we'll just use a pseudo selector and we'll say first of type for the left one because the left one appears first. And we'll say, let's make this left 0. And then we'll get the second control. So we'll do control and we'll do last of type. And that will be the one on the right-hand side. So we'll make that all the way to the right. And let's save this and let's see how much damage we've done on the front end. So I'm going to share over here. I'm going to reload this. Okay, so we're getting close, although it looks the same. Hold on 1 second, let me try. Let's take a look at what I did here. Not seeing those styles come through. I'm going back to my editor for a second. Let me just make sure that that's saved. Okay, so now we're getting there. Although looks like I screwed up this. Let's see here. Slide, next direction, height 100 should not be 100, it should be 100%. Let's go. I'm just going to do that. You don't need to see that. I'm changing that thing to 100%, saving that, coming back to my browser, giving it a second to rebuild, and let's clear the caches. Okay. Is everyone looking at my browser? We have this kind of like mini slideshow going here. So we have next, we have back, we can go through our slides like this. So that should generally be working. Now I'm trying to keep some eye on the time here. So I think we're doing okay. So we've done, so far we set up a basic slideshow here. That's pretty nice. Let's let me do one last thing here. Actually, I'm going to switch back. I'm going to style this button at the bottom. So this button all the way at the bottom, I'm going to get rid of the paragraph tags, and I'm just going to say, call this exit slides, and let's give this an ID of exit, and let's just target that down here at the bottom in our styles. Let's just say we want our exit to be display inline block, and we'll give it a margin of 20 pixels at the top and the bottom, and then we'll center it by doing auto, and let's save that. And let me go back to the browser and reload this. Okay, so now, so this looks kind of like a slideshow. It's not, not the prettiest slideshow you ever see, but it has transitions between slides, and you can exit your slideshow completely here and go back to your website and do stuff on your website. So that's all well and good. Now, if we go to the second slide here, so I want to talk a little bit about pagination. Now, I know I want to be conscious of time here, and I want to show some other things off. So I'm going to go over this pretty quick. If you have questions on this, come back to me later. But basically, what we have in Plenty, and I have this example over here on the homepage, is if you have something like a blog that has a lot of blog posts, you don't want to display all those to the users at one time, because first of all, the page would load really slow, but it'll also be overwhelming to your users to see all those pages. So for instance, we have 4 blog posts on this page on the site right now, and you can scroll between those, and you can actually hard refresh these. So I can do a hard refresh on this page here, and it knows because there's HTML fallbacks for each one of these pages, and you can click into any of these and the blog works paginated. Now, the way that works on the back end is if you come over here and you look at the code editor, in our plenty.json site-wide configuration file, we have this replacement pattern here called paginate. And what that's doing is it's looking to your Svelte templates, and it's trying to find a variable that has all the total pages. Now, that's kind of cool because we don't force you to use any specific pagination template when you're using Plenty. You can set up your pagination in any way you want. So over here in our index file, we did it like this, right? So we decided how many posts we want on every page. So we decided 3. And then we went and we got all the content and we filtered it out by blog post. So we only got blog post content. We measured how many posts we have to find out how many posts we have in total. And then basically we did a math sealant to round up by dividing how many posts by the post per page. So basically, if you have 1 post on a page, even though you want to have 3, for the last page, you still need a page for that, right? So you round up, and then that gives us the total number of pages. And the fact that we named it this variable, we're pulling that in over here in our file. So it basically says, hey, I know on the front end, this variable holds how many pages I have to create. And then what it does is it'll create a paginated output for each one of those behind the scenes. So if you have 10 pages, you'll get 10 pages of paginated output. And what that does is it also adds some metadata to each one of your content types, where basically you can pull out the pager from your content object here, and then you can set that to get things like the current page. I know that's a lot. There's a little bit more that goes into it in terms of like, getting your high and low range to determine what pages you want to appear, but this is all completely flexible, and you can set this up really in any way you want. Just basically, you have to keep in mind that at some point you need to know how many pages you have. You don't have to name it this, but you have to know how many pages you have. You have to tie that into your paginate variable, and then basically you can get your current page out of this content pager here. So that's pagination. I know maybe a lot of people aren't following along exactly. That's a big example in a short period of time, but there's some other things I want to cover. So I'm going to move on from that. I'll move back to my browser. And then I'm going to go to my slideshow. So, okay, we did our slides, we did pagination very quickly. And then now I want to talk a little bit about stores. So Svelte comes with writable stores out of the box. So you don't need a third-party library in order to do this. And we can accomplish a lot of cool things with stores. So for instance, every time we come to the slideshow, we have to go back to the first slide and then toggle through it. It would be cool if we could go to a certain place in our slideshow and then exit out of our slides, do some examples on the website, and then come back to this specific place in our slideshow later. Now we can do that. We actually have a stores example right on our blog post. So if you come here and you click writable stores, you see that we have this plus and this minus button. Now that's using writable stores out of the box. So if I were to go back to my code editor, you can see how this is all set up. Basically, we have this scripts folder and I added this stores example. And this is how you create a writable store. You basically pull writable out of your Svelte store here. And then you can assign a variable like count and basically set it at a value. Now we can do the same thing with our slideshow here. So for instance, if we look at that blog post, you can see here that we're pulling out the count from our store script. So let's copy that and let's bring that over to our slide. Let's go to the top in our scripts and let's basically pull that count in here, right? So we're now importing count from our scripts stores example. And then what we can do is we can say, well, we're going to want basically a function that's going to set the count, right? So I can call this whatever I want, but I'm going to call it set count. That's going to take a value. And then basically what we want to do is we want to take count. We want to set that value, right? So we'll do something like this. So we define our own function. This could be basically whatever you want, as long as you get you run a set on the count variable that we're pulling from our store. And then we could come down here and we could say, okay, well, let's update this store based on what position we are clicking in our previous and our next, right? So we can come in here and we could add an on click handler. So I could say on click and that equals. And basically when you want to run a function from your on click handler, the way you normally do it is you would do something like this, right? So you'd say on click run set count. Now, since we actually want to pass a argument to this, we actually have to run this as an arrow function. You would think you could just do something like this, right? You might say, okay, pass me, the order -1, right? And actually in our case, we want to do number order -1 because of the issue we talked about in the past, right? You might want to do something like that. Now this isn't going to work. You actually have to pass this first as an arrow function if you want to run that. So if you want to be able to pass a value to a function, make sure you just set it up like this. It's just a little quirk, but you're going to do something like that. So you're going to have an on click handler for setting the minus count. Let's add one as well to our next control here. Oops, mess up the spacing a little bit. Let's do +1. And so now that will update every time. And let's just save that. And let's just take a look at what we're seeing on the front end. It's not going to be complete at this point, but I just want to kind of show what's happening here. So I'm going to reload. I'm going to go to my slides. Now I'm going to go to the second slide here. I'll exit. And then since we're tying into the same stores example, I should be able to click on this. And you can see that we're on 2, right? So it's still going on the second slide here. Now, if I click slides, it goes back to slide 1 because we haven't updated our link yet. But if I just to show another example, I could go to slide 3 this time, exit, go to our writable stores, we're on 3, right? So basically what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're pulling in the store value into our actual slides link up here in our nav. So let me switch back and show how to do that real quick. Switch back to my text editor. And I'm going to go to my nav.svelte. And in here, I'm going to add a script. So add a script tag. And basically what I want to do is I want to import count again. So I'm going to import count. And this is going to come from our, right? You see that we're in the global folder here. So we have to come out of the global folder, right? We have to go into the scripts folder and then get stores.svelte. So come up a level, go into scripts, and then go into stores.svelte. Okay, so once we have count, we can make a new variable. I'm going to make a variable. I'm just going to call this slide. I'm going to initialize it. So I'm going to say let slide. And then I'm going to do a count.subscribe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the value and I'm going to arrow function set our local variable equal to slide, right? So for instance, we have slide now. So I'm basically saying, okay, get the count out of our count, get our subscribe out of our count value, and just set it to this local variable, which we can then use instead of our hard-coded one here. We can come down here and put our slide in there to get exactly which slide we're on. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to switch back to my browser and bring you along with me for the ride. And then if I come here, I'm going to reload again. So that's going to actually reset our count to 0. So we're going to go back to the first slide initially. Whoops, slide 0. Okay, well, another thing we have to do. Let me go back to, oh my God, I got things popping up. I'm going to go back to my text editor real quick. We actually need to initialize our store to be 1, not 0. We don't have any 0 slide. So I'm going to go to 1. I'm going to set that as our first slide. I'm going to resave that. And then let's go back to our browser one more time. And come here, reload. Okay, we're going to go to slides. So we go to slide 1. I could go to slide 2. I could go to slide 3. And then if I exit out of here, and I show some examples, like we look at the dynamic components or something like that. We go home, maybe we go to about page. And if I go back to my slides, we're back at slide 3 at this point, right? Because we have that store updating, and it can keep track of where we are in our slideshow, which is kind of cool. Hopefully people are with me. I want to open up some time for questions. So I'm just going to blow through this last slide here. So I want to talk quickly about dynamic components. And the idea with dynamic components is you can have a content-driven architecture for your websites, and then you can pull in structured HTML based on what you define in your JSON content source. So it's really powerful because the way I like to think about websites is I like to model my content first. I like to know, what my messaging is, what my audience is, how I want to structure that in a very transparent way. And then once I have that structure, I can just build the actual HTML layouts around that structure. And if you're familiar with things like Svelte or other front-end libraries, if you do dynamic imports, you're probably going to realize pretty quickly that you run into some challenges on the front end. So basically, dynamic imports all resolve asynchronously. And if you want to have HTML fallbacks for things that are resolving asynchronously, that's really hard. So we take care of all that on the back end for you. We actually, we run everything in this construct called component signatures. You don't really have to worry about it. It's a plenty specific thing, but basically what we do is, let me show you an example, this dynamics component example. So we have this blue ball in this yellow square being pulled in here. Now, these aren't dynamic because they're moving. Those are just simple CSS animations. Don't worry about that. They're dynamic because we don't actually explicitly call these anywhere in our templates. We just define them in our content source, and then we're able to pull them in dynamically. And let me just go to my text editor to show exactly what that means. So I'm over here in my text editor. I'm looking at my blog pages. So first of all, I'm going to look at the components example. So you see here in the content source, we have a title, we have a body, and then we define a key here called components. This could be called whatever you want, because in Plenty, there's no defined keys. The keys are up to you. It's a completely free data structure. And then I basically said, oh, I want to call this components. And then I wanted to get the ball component and the block component. That corresponds over here to these components we have in our folder. So we have a ball.svelte and a block.svelte. And then in our blog over here, where we're actually pulling it in, we're pulling this in our blog.svelte template. You notice here that we don't actually explicitly import the ball or the block anywhere here. What we do at the bottom here is we actually go through our components and we say, hey, if we have components, make sure we go through each one of these components, get the name of it, and then just load that through this construct called all components. And then we're using a component signature here. Now, there's more details about how this is all set up on the front end. Let me switch back to the website. So if you go to this all components link here, if I can open that. Oh, I guess I am opening it. Hold on. I'm trying to figure out how to use my keyboard. Okay, so this is the documentation for that. So basically, it shows how to use this default prop in order to load any component on your website. You can actually load any layout whatsoever, and it will work both asynchronously and synchronously. So you can pull it in on the front end, and you'll get HTML fallbacks for each one of those pages. Now, just keep in mind that this, like I said earlier, we're changing a lot of the API things with the 0.4 release. So this is likely to be called all layouts in the future. Just keep that in mind if you're looking at this video later down the road. That naming convention is going to change, but essentially it'll work exactly the same way. So that's one way that you can get dynamic layouts on your site using dynamic components. And basically you can have a component-based architecture where you don't have to define exactly the order of your layouts ahead of time. You can just do that on the fly with your content. Okay. So back to our slides. We finished dynamic components. I want to open up time in case there's any questions. So thank you for listening. If you want to stay in touch with this project, you can follow us on Twitter at Plantico, or go to our GitHub page, or just check out the website. We definitely appreciate if people want to actually go to our GitHub page and star the repository. So if you go to GitHub, you see here we have stars. Basically, there's a lot of sites that are aggregator sites that are pulling in the Plenty project. And in order for us to appear anywhere on the rankings where people would notice the project, more stars would help us out. So if you like the project and you're interested in helping out, then we definitely appreciate a star. It's free. You don't even get charged for it. So that'd be awesome if you want to help out that way. But if not, I totally understand. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know. I'd love to answer any questions about the project or this presentation. So yeah, I'll open it up.
I had a quick question on your advancing your previous and your next. You just have minus and plus one. So if you go fall off the end, what happens?
Yeah. So that's just me being lazy and not accounting for it. So basically, if I go off to the end, let me show you right here. So I'm going to next, and you can see, I don't know if you can see in the bottom, it has like a little pop-up to show what link it's going to. It's going to slide 6, which doesn't exist. So basically it's going to give you a 404 not found. Now, if you were being, if you were really trying to do this well, you would actually try to look for the max and the min slide and make sure you don't go above that. And that's actually, it's kind of similar to an example we have on our homepage with pagination. Pagination is a little bit different, but the idea here is you can see that we're on the first page of pagination, and it does not let us click anything below this. You can't go previous and you can't go first. And the same thing happens when I'm on the second page here. You can't go, to the next one after that. So basically it's aware of what the lower, like the high and the low parameters are around that thing. So you should set up something very similar for your slides. We just, we didn't do that in this case because I was being lazy and wanted to do it quick, but that's a good call. Did that answer your question?
Yes. So could you just use a function like you did for
yeah.
parts?
Yeah, let's take a look at, I think maybe the easiest way is to look at how we're doing it on the blog post, because it's going to be kind of similar, right? So I'm going to go to my index, my homepage. This is where we're setting up the pagination for the blog post. Let me open some of this up so we can see what's going on here. Okay, so we basically, and actually it's in a different component. So so we set this high and this low range here. And then we're passing that to a grid component. So we're actually doing all our pagination in a separate component here. So we have a grid component. Let me go to that component here. And so inside grid.svelte, you can see here that we actually specify some things. We say, hey, and actually, there's been a while since I looked at this, make sure I'm not screwing this up. But we're saying, okay, so we're sorting by items, and then we're setting some parameters around making sure that our incrementer here is within the range. Actually, no, that's actually, sorry. This is displaying how, like, which items should appear in that grid. So make sure we actually have, like, the first through the third blog post, and then the next page would be the fourth, through the sixth blog post. So that's what that's doing there. Let me see where the controls, where did I define my controls? I might have actually done that back on the index. Let me go back 1 second. So our index.svelte. Okay, so we're actually using another component here, pager, and we're passing the current page and the total pages. So let's take a look at pager here. It's defined in a separate component. And this is where we're defining exactly that logic, right? So we're saying, okay, we want the first page and the last page, but we want to make sure that the current page is greater than 1, because we don't have anything less than 1. So if it's not, make sure that we're basically disabling going further forward or further backward. We could do something very similar with our slides, right? We could say, okay, we have 5 slides, so 5 pages. We want to make sure that we don't go before slide 1. We want to make sure we don't go beyond slide 5, right? So we could do the same thing and check at the bottom. It'd look like this, right? Say, hey, if the current slide is less than all the slides we have, then it's fine. Then make sure that we can increment and go forward. But if it's not, then make sure that those things are disabled again. So don't actually have a link to go anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Is there other questions? Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I appreciate everyone hopping on and
Good.
taking a look at the. Oh, hey, Benji.
What's the right scale here? Would you use this for a website with 10, 20 pages? I think yes. Would you use it for 100 or 200? I don't know. Would you use it for 1,000 or 2,000? I think not.
Yeah, that's a great question. So with any static site generator, your builds are going to slow down when you increase the number of content, unless you're doing incremental builds, which actually we have in the works right now. We have some working models of incremental builds and in-memory builds. So those things are getting faster all the time. I was basically trying to target smaller sites to begin with, just because I think they'll be easier for us to learn on, and also onboard people who maybe have less investment in their stuff, just so we can figure out some of the kinks. But I've done a couple tests with like hundreds of pages, and I can still, on my computer, I can still build a page with like several hundred pages in less than a second. So it's not painfully slow to do that, because it has a Go backend, and it runs the build process pretty fast. So I think in the future, it should be definitely possible to run, thousands of pages. For now, I would say if you're in the hundreds range, then you're probably okay. Of course, Plenty is still pretty young, so there's a lot of kinks that we're working out. Like there's tons of optimizations we can do. It's pretty nice out of the box. Like the plenty.co site, I think scores like a 95 on the Lighthouse scoring. So it's already pretty good if you compare it to other frameworks, but we're not even optimizing anything on the front end to make things fast. We're not even minifying things or anything right now. So to get it production ready, I think, there's some steps we can do in the future to make it a lot better. But even without those steps, I think it's pretty good for some smaller sites now anyways. Yeah.
But there are non-technical things to consider in terms of scale, like are you going to lose track of where all your files are?
Sure.
How big of a burden is it going to be to maintain things? And I think those might be the limiting factor on the scale, rather than how quickly it can be built.
Sure. Yeah. So building is one aspect. Yeah. There's a lot of things to consider when scaling. Also, there's a lot of things when considering like who is the person maintaining the site, right? So there's a lot of visionary work happening, but we have a lot of coding to do to get it to the point where we can hand this off to non-technical editors and things like that. If someone is savvy and they know how to rig things together, like a headless CMS, that could be Drupal, or that could be Strapi, or that could be whatever, then you could use Plenty in an environment with non-technical people today, but that takes a little bit of work. My plan is down the road, that process is going to get a lot easier. And I'm hoping that Plenty becomes something that's really accessible to lots of folks down the road. So you're totally right. There's a lot of considerations that go into building websites, scale and usability, developer experience, all that thing. So yeah, I think we're making strides every day to make it better, but it's an early point in the life cycle of Plenty. So there's definitely a lot of learning that's going to happen in the future. So I don't know, stay tuned if you're interested in it. Thanks for the question, Benji.
Welcome.
So looks like there's some questions. Look like the question is it using Svelte? Yes, it's using Svelte. Yes, Svelte is, if you're not used to Svelte, it's a little different, but I think Svelte is a really great front-end library. So if you want something like React, and in my opinion, Svelte lowers the barriers to getting an experience like React. So if you found React hard in the past, you might find Svelte easier. So this might be something that's worth looking at. Any other questions? Okay.
Actually, one more.
Oh, sure.
How close are you to a Windows package?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, so we used to have a Windows package back when so Plenty has gone through a lot of iterations. The first iterations of Plenty, we actually used to call out to the computer system Node.js and NPM, and we used to run those things. But right now, actually, Plenty does not, you don't have to have any dependencies to run Plenty. You just download the project. You don't have to have JavaScript installed on your computer. You don't have to have Node or Go or anything, right? You can just download Plenty and use it. When we did that, we encountered some challenges to running on Windows just by the way we're running the builds now. So we actually lost Windows support. Luckily, if you're on a Windows 10 system, there is something called WSL, which is Windows Subsystem for Linux. Windows actually ships with a Linux kernel now, so you can actually run basically a Linux environment on your Windows computer. And that would be my recommended way of running Plenty at this point. So basically run it in WSL, and then you would basically have Linux-like command line tools available to you to run Plenty. And I would just install the binary manually that way. We definitely need better documentations on how to do that, just to make that easier for folks. But that's definitely what I recommend. In the future, I'm hoping we can get back to native Windows builds as well. We just have to, basically, we're pulling down a V8 project and we're running that in Go. That's how we're compiling all the components directly in V8. And in order to get that cross-compiling from a Linux to a Windows computer, there's some challenges there that I have to figure out at some point. So I'm hoping we'll get there, but it might be a little ways out still to get natively on Windows.
Thanks.
Sure.
Great. Hi, Jim.
Yes.
So yeah, you said you're gonna go to the Drupal, right? You try to build in Drupal. So how, like, what's the approach you're gonna do there?
Yeah. So if you wanted to integrate Plenty with something like Drupal, the approach would be basically you build out, if you're familiar with Drupal, you'd build out a content type like you would normally with in Drupal. You can do that right through the interface where you assign what fields you want. And then basically what you want to do is you want to expose that information as a REST endpoint. So you could do that a lot of different ways. You could, you could build a view, and then you could have a JSON display. So basically you could say, I built a bunch of events, for instance, in Drupal, and maybe an event has a title and a date field and a description, right? And then I can make a view that displays all the information in JSON. And basically what you could do in Plenty, and this is something that we're working on right now, is basically you'd point your build process out to that endpoint. And then every time you'd run that build, which could happen either locally on your computer, or if you're running it in CI, so continuous integration, like GitLab has a CI runner, or GitHub Actions, or maybe Netlify CI, or whatever it may be. Basically, every time that build happens, it would look out to that URL and it would copy that JSON down into your content folder. And then basically you could use that in your templates and it would automatically create those pages. And the cool thing about Plenty is, since there's no defined keys, you don't have to massage the data at all. We're not forcing you to like do any kind of transform layer in between. You can basically straight copy that down. And as long as you've accounted for that structure in your templates, then basically that would just work automatically. Of course, if you have to do some massaging of the data, then you'll have to put some kind of middle layer in there, which we haven't figured out yet.
So basically, instead of having JSON files that you edit in your text editor, you'd be pulling the JSON from Drupal.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So I think Plenty has advantages and disadvantages in that way. So I think the fact that we don't define any keys allows us to do that straight copy a lot easier. If you want to massage data and do that, then, or pull into GraphQL, we're probably not going to do that anytime soon. I think GraphQL is great. And maybe in the future, that would be something cool to pull in, just so you can have a consistent experience. Like I really like Gatsby's approach, right? So Gatsby has a lot of plugins where you can pull from all sorts of REST APIs or whatever, but eventually they convert everything into GraphQL before you actually use it on your front end. And that's pretty nice because your designers or your front end developers, they always get a consistent experience dealing with data. And that's pretty neat, but I do find that it's can be a little bit overkill for a lot of smaller, simpler sites. I run a couple of small Gatsby sites. One we pull from Datto CMS and we have some translations and this and that, but I feel like GraphQL is cool, but for a small website with a few pages, sometimes it's overkill. It seems a little more challenging than it needs to be. So I think that this approach where you're copying JSON down and then you're just using whatever fields structure that JSON provides, in my opinion, would be an easier approach to get up and running for a simpler site. People might disagree. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Well, awesome. I appreciate everyone tuning into the session. Yeah. If you have any feedback later on, tweet me or send me an email or something. I'd be happy to answer that.
Thank you, Jim.
Great. Thanks, everyone.